The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of our guest. We Don't Talk About That is a platform for open, honest, and authentic conversations around mental health. We believe in protecting the authenticity, vulnerability, and lived experiences of our guests, and offering them the freedom to share their personal perspectives with us. Our hope is that you are enriched by what you hear.
Hello, I'm Josh Cantwell, Chief Executive Officer at Grand Mental Health. Welcome to We Don't Talk About That, a podcast committed to honest, direct conversations about mental health. In each episode, we talk openly about the many different challenges that face our communities and those we serve. Together, our team and special guests explore new ways to approach mental health, from progressive thinking to mindful treatment. Here's to open minds and open dialogue. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Jessica Lobetz. Joining me in the studio today is Monroe Nichols, Tulsa's new mayor and the first African-American to ever earn this title in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Congratulations, Mayor Nichols.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. Now, you just came out of your first 100 days as mayor of Tulsa. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming the mayor and what this moment means to you personally?
Yeah, most directly, the journey was over a year on the campaign trail talking about how we make Tulsa the best city in the country. What I learned along the way, though, is that if you go and you have real conversations with people and you talk about holding yourself accountable and you lay out a plan for the future, so it's not just about the politics, but it's about a pathway forward, people will buy into that. And there's probably some things that were seemingly barriers in the past, race, whatever the case may be, that are less of a barrier now because people are ready to engage and figure out how do we get on the other side of some of these challenges. And so more than anything, this has been the most humbling experience of my life. One, because you stayed on the shoulders of so many people. And there's a lot of people who were smarter, more talented, potentially more capable, but didn't have the opportunity. But humility is what I feel every day. This is the most amazing job in the country, I think, and the most amazing city in the country.
Absolutely. Well, you did it, and we're still so very proud of you. And you talked about just a second ago that, we've come a long way in terms of, Tulsa's complicated racial history. Yeah. And you and I know both how significant that history is. So it must mean something to you to lead a city like Tulsa, where one of the worst acts of racial violence occurred almost 104 years ago in 1921. So tell me about what this means to you today.
It means everything to me. You think about the opportunity out in front of us right now, given the racial history of this community, which is we are Greenwood in the race massacre. We actually are also home to 3 native reservations. Also right now, the largest growing populations in our community are in the Asian and Hispanic communities. We are like a multicultural community that has its origins in like the first Americans, right? And then we were the greatest innovators in the history of Black folks at the time. Like, we've been all those things right here in this space. And for me, particularly thinking about the Greenwood District, particularly thinking about the massacre, particularly thinking about how it was rebuilt after the massacre, only have like urban renewal come through and knock it out again, underscores why it's important that somebody like me sits in this chair to make sure that we do things in a lot better, more responsible way moving forward, right? But I got to tell you a cool thing that I think is incredibly significant, that sometimes it, but we live here and I'm doing this job every day, so it's easy sometimes to lose sight on what it means to even other people. I think I shared with you before the show that this past weekend I was in Selma for the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, and I met some folks on that bridge who were on that bridge 60 years ago. And just mind you, these are people on that bridge fighting to make sure that we all had the right to vote. And without them, I might not even be able to vote for who's the mayor, much less be the mayor. But when I told these folks on that bridge that my name is Monroe Nichols, I'm the mayor of Tulsa, they said, Tulsa, they all lit up. It's not just what Tulsa means to us. Tulsa means a significant amount to people all across the country. And it was in that moment that I realized that because of that history that we have this special place in the hearts of so many people, particularly black folks across this country. And it means something to them. And I remember coming back from that experience just last weekend with this renewed sense of like pride, obligation, but also that sense of humility, because again, I recognize that this is not just about winning one election, but I also recognize that we've got to do a good job. That's how we actually make it all worth it, is that we do a good job while we're here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that story, and I really have goosebumps to hear that on the bridge, Selma, that you could have such an amazing moment.
Wild.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that. There is pressure, and this podcast is a conversation on mental health and reducing the stigma. So we're going to shift gears here a little bit. When you were growing up, was mental health something that you talked about a lot at home? Did you hear a lot of people talking about therapy and just supports for how they were experiencing the world?
I don't think the conversation around like therapy and supports were a big part of it. I think you were exposed to people who were struggling. And I think we were, when I was younger, so I was born in 1983. So as I was kind of coming up, it was, late 80s, early 90s. And I think at the time, there was enough conversations about what do you do about it when you're struggling. There was identified this person is struggling, or, they had a breakdown. We hear people had a breakdown, so they went to, some sort of mental health hospital, but there was no conversation about maintenance of your challenges. In fact, I don't even think that it was really socialized about taking medicine, but like you were kind of seen as like a crazy person if you had to take medicine. No, seriously, that was a big part of it. But I experienced this in a very direct way. My mom was a licensed chemical dependency counselor as a probation officer. My dad was a police officer. My dad died when he was 35 years old and I was 14. The story, as it relates to this, is my dad died as an alcoholic. And so my dad had these struggles, and he dealt with them by drinking, and it ended up killing him at an early age. And so for me, it's very personal. This conversation about mental health is very personal to me, because, if maybe we would have had a better understanding about how you support somebody through that, Gavin, my kid now, would have known who his grandfather was. It'd be somebody he'll never meet, right? And so, I hope that what's in there is that people understand. And I think that the world is different now. Now, we still don't have enough in the way of capacity. I think there's probably still some stigma associated with it. But what I hope people understand is just get the help you need. Do what you have to do, because you can't fill somebody's cup up if you're empty. And we always got to recognize that and figure out how do you get yourself to a better spot. It's something I deal with every day. You deal with a lot of pressure. You deal with a lot of responsibility. And then, you also have, and that's on the professional side.
Right.
That doesn't speak to being a dad and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And so all those things can be tough. And sometimes it may be hard to identify, do I need to go talk to somebody or not? But I think being in tune with yourself is really critically important. But yeah, growing up, it was more about the direct experience of being 14 years old and somebody telling you that your daddy died. That was tough.
Well, first, thank you for sharing that story, because that is a really harsh reality at such a young age that, coping through hardship and through lived experience, was what took your father from you. How did that story and that experience shape you to be honest and upfront about what you need and how you can survive this, what can be a very difficult world?
I think what's really interesting, I don't think it taught me much about what I needed. I think it taught me a little bit about like maybe some personal resilience and perseverance that I'm not sure was even the most healthy way of thinking about it, right? Because my dad died when I was so young, my thought was I had to live for like two people now, because I didn't want his story to end that way. And I'm not sure that's always the most healthy way of thinking about things, right? But what I did have in my life, and I think this was the great equalizer for me, I always knew I had access to people who could help me if I needed it. And so just knowing that it was there is what got me through. I still have my mother, my grandparents, all that kind of stuff. So I had a village around me that I knew I could lean on if I needed to. And I think that's what got me through, right? It was this thought that like it's going to be tough moving forward, but let me lean into these relationships. I want to make sure that I make my grandfather, who lost a son, proud and all that kind of stuff. So I've found a way to leverage my family to get through that, because I always knew I had the help if I needed it. I didn't always know how to articulate what I needed, you know what I mean? But I just was a family dude, and that's how I got through it, was the people around me.
Well, so fortunate to have that community. So you and I share the experience of losing a father at a young age. My father passed when I was 4 due to a tragic accident. But this is leading me to the question around grief and how we deal with grief, especially when you lose a parent unexpectedly. It was nothing we could prepare for. And of course, me being 4 at the time, how in the world do I understand now that Daddy was here yesterday and he's gone tomorrow? So even as you have thought about grief and losing a parent, how have you been navigating that just throughout your life?
It's really interesting. And I share this with a lot of people. I had so much anxiety after I became a parent at 24. I had so much anxiety about living to my 36th birthday. I had a very difficult time, figuring out. I used to not be able to sleep at night. That was very difficult for me to do. And I just had so much anxiety about it. And so there's part of me that I was living to just get past 35. And the closer I got to it, and so when I turned 36, 37, I started sleeping like a baby. Now it's hard for me to stay awake. But growing up, there was something about that making it to 36 years old was like a watershed moment in my life. And I can't really explain it, but that was something I've always known.
So same here. I'm getting emotional in the studio because my father passed at 32. And so it was something about getting closer to 32 and will I survive 32? And then the feeling of outliving a parent is something also that I've had to understand and grapple with and question. I mean, 32 is young, 35 is young, and we've made it both past that.
And the hard thing, the crazy thing that I remember thinking is I was 14. My parents divorced when I was 4. So my dad lived in Houston at this point, and I lived with my mom in Waco. I was 14. I was 2 years out of getting my driver's license. I saw me and my dad's relationship. We were only going to go on up and up. And then somebody passes away, and so you lose the life that you have now with them, but you lose the life that you thought you were going to have in the future. But then you also don't have that person who, in large part, may be exactly like you, who's not around anymore. So how do you navigate the world? And turning 36 was a life-changing experience for me. It really was. I had so much anxiety about, what if I don't make it, leave Gavin behind, all this. Because it was something that kept me up every single night for about 11 years. But I also went through this weird deal after 35 where it was the first time I can remember that I was very mildly angry, with my dad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm how could you not have been strong enough to get to this point, right?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for sharing that. And I understand and empathize because I have had the very same experience. So tell me what you do to take care of you. How do you prioritize your mental health? How are you strong not only for yourself, for Gavin, and then, of course, the city of Tulsa? Yeah. So how are you caring for you?
I chill out, man. At night, at the end of the night, I sit. Sometimes the TV is on, but it could be on mute. Sometimes the TV is off. And it's just the calmness of it all. I think is what gets me through it. And a lot of times I'll take a walk, but if it's too cold, you can't do that. So it really is the intentional time where I just don't do anything. That gets tougher and tougher when you're mayor. It's hard to not be able to do anything. But even if it's a pretty late night, I will sit in the dark, collect my thoughts, so I don't go to bed with all the things running through my head. I don't I let go of as much anxiety as I possibly can. And at this point in my life, I've coached myself to say, hey, all that stuff's going to be there tomorrow. And if you spend all tonight, with all stuff going through your head, you're going to wake up tomorrow and be exhausted. You're not going to get anything done. And so for me, it really is just taking the intentional time just to be still, as they say. And so being still is what I do.
I love that because just like you said, all that stuff will be there tomorrow, but we need you to be there tomorrow too. Right. We need you to make it through that. Tell me about self-doubt in your career. You were a legislator. You were in economic development at the Tulsa Regional Chamber. You have done a lot in the public, sector and service sector. But tell me about a time maybe where you didn't think you could do it, or maybe you didn't know if you had enough to do it, and how have you navigated that?
So I was an athlete all growing up. and end up, being an athlete in college. And there's something about that where, you're always faced with some level of can you do it? And that's more physical, but you like mentally you start to understand that there's something into the work you put in, you get out of it, right? So like you kind of get this idea that you can overcome things. And I think for me, I've always kind of leaned into something that I thought was going to be a difficult challenge. So one of the reasons that I came to the University of Tulsa as a student was Tulsa was the only place that I could have gone to college that I'd never been before. I knew nobody here. And for me, that was a challenge I wanted to lean into. It was a tremendous amount of anxiety, but it was like, if you can prove to yourself you can do this, there's a lot of other things you can prove yourself you can do. And I think the greatest amount of self-doubt has always been associated with being a parent. I mean, you're supposed to have all the answers. I remember when I was growing up, I thought mom knew everything. And now I'm like, she didn't know nothing.
She did the best she could do.
Did the best she could, like I'm doing, right? And so, for me, the self-doubt's always set in. It's like, can I move professionally and do what I have to do and be a good parent? And then it's like, when you think about the professional part of it, no matter what job I've ever had, there's very few people who look like me who had done that job before me or being around me. I think the chamber might be one of the most diverse places I had worked, if I'm not mistaken, right? And so you have that. And then, I was chief of staff to Dr. Clancy at OU when I was like 26 years old or something like that. And I remember sitting in a meeting. This was funny. We were in like a staff meeting with all the physicians, and they were talking about like brain development. And they're like, yeah, the brain's not fully formed until like 28. I'm sitting there like 26. I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right.
Y'all saying my brain not developed.
Yeah, okay, well, all right. I mean, you're a professional. But I think it's all been, the doubt is always there. I've always kind of leaned into the doubt, right? And that's the best way you not only learn, but I think it also means that you have to have the resolve to do something. You got to really want to do it and be committed to it. And that's what's been a lot of fun. I got criticized, I remember, during the campaign about, having had worked a lot of different places. And part of that was because every time there was a challenge and there was something new to learn, and there was some responsibility associated with it, I was always kind of like I want the ball type of a dude. And so the self-doubt has always been there. I have it today sometimes. But I've learned over time, you learn how to find allies in your life. They're going to help you, lead you through it. Just like, you learn, as we were talking, when I was younger, my dad died, I leaned into people who I knew could help me, whether I asked them or not. It's the reason why I hired the kind of people I hired in the mayor's office, like people who are better at things than I am. I said I'll make this the safest big city in the country. I ain't never been a police officer. Laura Roberts is a commissioner of public safety. She was a police officer for 29 years. I have been a staffer here in this building for Mayor Taylor. I've been a state legislator for 8 years before I got elected. But I did not have the experience of running a city by myself. Well, guess what I did? I found somebody who had the experience of running a city, and Mike Miller's here as a partner of mine who works in my office to get that done. And so some of it is letting go of any level of, pridefulness. Everybody knows that I'm the top dog. Is like, well, if you're mayor, you are the top dog, but you're the top dog that 400,000 people are depending on you to get it right. And so it's been like a humbling deal. It's like if you're not an expert in something, you lean into those experts, you attract great people to work with you, and you give them a lot of free reign to get stuff done. And I've never been intimidated by that. And that's how you get past the self-doubt. You feel the gap.
Mm-hmm. And you keep going.
You keep going.
And so what a beautiful model for young people and for people who are feeling that even as adults that maybe they can't or they aren't good enough. But the story that you just shared and the process that you just shared hopefully will be inspiring to other people who are dealing with that. Yeah. I want to shift gears for just a second into breaking the stigma. Mental health stigma, especially in communities of color, remains a barrier for many people. Yeah. How do you think leaders like you can help break the stigma?
I think being honest about your story. I didn't talk about my dad and, how I, you know me for a long time. You may have known my dad passed away. Yeah, that's right. Even before, hey, we go way back. That's right. But I just more recently, as I've grown in my journey as far as like being a legislator and being mayor now, being really open about that, because, the one thing that means the most to me in this life is that whenever, it's time for me to transition into what happens next, that your child is in a position where they can be successful. You don't have to worry about that anymore. My dad passed away not knowing that. And I think for black men in particular, you need to understand, if you are struggling, there's a lot of people who love you and care for you. I think that's one of the tough things, right? Like, I think when you're going through that, you get to a place, and I've been at this place before, where you think, oh, maybe everybody'd be better off if I wasn't here. Like, if we're honest, a lot of us have been in that place. Now, it does not mean that you were going to commit suicide or anything like that, but you get to that kind of a place. And sometimes you need to be reminded that people do love you, people do depend on you, people are there for you. But sometimes you got to do that work yourself. But to understand the consequence of not doing it, right? And I think that's one thing we can all shed a little light on. But also know that, seeking any kind of treatment you need is not a sign of weakness. That is a sign of strength.
So you're going into the next question, because that's what I want to talk about. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. So what advice would you give to young men of color or folks from historically marginalized identities who feel pressure to be strong without showing vulnerability? What would you say to them?
I think vulnerability to me is not seeking what you need, because eventually it's going to show up somewhere else. And the way that you can, it's just like, I was an athlete, right? I probably would have grown up to be naturally strong just by growing up. But because I had people who helped train me along the way, I was a collegiate athlete. We think about this all the time. You always need somebody to help you along the way if you're trying to get somewhere. The same is true in your journey in life and the things that go in between your ears. And I think this is what we all have to understand. Going to seek out help is no different than going to the gym. No different than doing any of that stuff. Seeking out advice, a different perspective, having somebody help you, think about something a little bit differently. That's no different than any kind of other thing that you might do that you need. It's no different than going on a vacation, right? I've never felt like I was going on a vacation because I was weak or vulnerable. I never felt that way doing anything else. I think we have to think about this kind of stuff the same way. I think the way that you keep yourself strong is that you are then able to deal with what's going on. And if you need support in dealing with what's going on, I think that is the best way that you show how really strong you are. Otherwise, like I said, you end up in a very vulnerable state. Mm-hmm. My father, who I missed and I loved, ended his life in a very vulnerable state. He was addicted to alcohol. He was no longer strong. Mm-hmm. He may have started strong. He was no longer strong. And I hate that, because he was a strong. This is a police officer who spent his life protecting people, and because he didn't find the help he needed, he ended his life in an incredibly vulnerable state. And I think that's what you have to understand. Vulnerability sneaks up on you.
It does.
One drink at a time,
mm-hmm.
one this or that at a time. Strength is understanding who you are and making sure that you are sharpening yourself every step of the way.
So what would you say, because you talked a lot about community, family, support system. So how can we create these safe spaces within our communities where mental health conversations can be normalized and supported?
I think it's that. I think you got to talk about it, right? Like, I think it's really interesting. I even say this like in the context of when I was running for mayor. One of the tricks is like, if you think about, oh, well, my neighbor and I may not think the same way. We're probably not voting for the same person. We're just not going to talk about politics. Until you realize, oh, you know what? Oh, we agree on these things, right? I think the same thing is true about this mental health conversation. I'm like, oh, I'm sitting here talking, and I talked about not being able to, all the anxiety I had until I turned 36. And you're like, oh, me too. And so I think that is part of it, right? Just bringing your honest self into conversations. These things naturally pop up. And then you realize you're not alone. I think a lot of times it's, with the mental health challenges that I know I face and people face, you feel like you're on an island. And so you feel like you're the only person going through something, which exacerbates the feeling that you have when you're struggling from a mental health standpoint. I think us being honest about who we are, ain't nothing wrong with that. And I think that is what, leads people. So if we talk about how can we have these conversations, just have them.
Absolutely. No matter the title you have.
That's exactly right. Just have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what inspires you to keep going on the tough days? Who or what inspires you to keep going?
Man, for me, I spend a significant amount of time getting outside of the building. Like today, I went and I read to some kids, and I think about, their futures and how, we all have to come together to do our best for them. I went and spoke to the student athletes of the football team at TU, so it was like kind of this is where it all started for me. But then I just see people every day asking, how can I help? And for me, that's how you get through it, because it's like we all realize we're all here together. There was a guy named Eric Liu. I was in his fellowship a couple of years ago. He was a speechwriter for Bill Clinton, and he started Citizen University, which is like a way that, folks getting together to talk about, really our faith in each other and how we're going to make this country better, essentially. And he said, the number one question for us to ask in a civilized society is how we're going to live together. And so waking up every day and helping us answer that question at a time where you have these conversations about immigration and this kind of stuff and taking away grants and people losing their jobs, and you got all the noise around the State Department of Education here and all this kind of stuff, that we can still carve out a space here in Tulsa where we can just figure every day how we're going to live together. That is very, very much a motivating force for me, is that we're going to crack the code on how you do it in a city that I think is the most unique, special place in the country. It's a fun challenge, and it's going to continue to be one for as long as I'm here.
Well, the goal is to live together. My last question for you is this one. If you could leave our listeners with one message about leadership or about mental health, what would it be?
I think on the mental health side is kind of what we talked about before. Do not be afraid to just have casual conversations about your whole self. People are going to accept you no matter who you are, but you never know how much your story is going to impact somebody else. And that's not if you are a mayor or whatever. It's just like somebody will be inspired and touched by what you said, and somebody will identify with what you said, and you never know, you might save somebody's life. Like that is what I would say on the mental health front. I think on kind of the leadership front, I think is what you asked, is really like, be bold, man. I know it's like a rap lyric, but like, as best we know, you really only live once. And we're here for such a short amount of time. And I think it's about like handing off a baton. And so we have an opportunity right here, right now, that we understanding the stories that came before us, but are not constrained by that story. Like we are literally writing new chapters in what we're going to be as a city. And that starts with self. You as a person, what is it that you want to do? What story do you want to write? And I just think this is the best place in the country to write that story. And I'm excited to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Nichols, for sharing your insights and your experiences with us today. We really appreciate you. I'm
so glad to be on. And thank you for what you all do. Again, you talk about how do we turn things around. It's about having amazing professionals who are community-centered, putting people right in the middle of their work. You all do that, and as mayor, but more importantly, as a citizen of the city, as a parent, as the son of a dad who struggled, I say thank you.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of We Don't Talk About That, supported by Grand Mental Health. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast and become part of our growing community of mental health advocates. Visit grandmh.com for more information.